Donald Trump has sent a threatening letter to the BBC and it's caused a huge commotion. Not only that, the BBC Director General, Davie, has handed in his resignation. So too has Deborah Turnis, all over the Panorama edit, which evidently puts Donald Trump in a bad light. Hypocrisy, I say. Media in general, and the BBC also, could be accused over, for instance, their bias towards Israel over the Gaza issue. But the reality is not even using the word genocide, for instance, not showing individual Palestinians who were killed, for instance, and naming them and giving them the history that they deserved and giving their audience the background. And compared to that, when, for instance, Israeli prisoners of war were released, they got the full treatment. The BBC would go into their lives, their backgrounds, give them an entire humanizing cover-up. Why the bias? And yet the reality is that there are people like Mike Prescott, who actually is at the heart of this Trump letter and the whole BBC fiasco at Panorama, says that it's actually guilty of anti-Israel bias. I mean, what kind of world do we live in where people from the Telegraph can see the BBC as being anti-Israel, when quite clearly all the evidence suggests they've been piggybacking and giving the Israelis a nice, easy ride? I mean, it's bizarre, but this isn't new, and it's not restricted to the BBC as a state actor or as an extension of British intelligence or the British state, because that's been there from day one. MI6 used to actually have an office in the BBC when it first opened up. And so it's no hidden thing that there are agendas. One expects it. But the hypocrisy of then claiming to be impartial, trying to pretend that you're neutral, that you're not in any way biased, that just is nonsense. And the world knows it, and the BBC and Western media is losing its credibility. We hoped that social media would become the source of some change, and that people would have a chance to see and hear independent voices that were genuinely not pushed by state actors or necessarily corporate interest. The fact is, even that whole dream is collapsing with the likes of Piers Morgan and other frontmen who are posing as independent commentators. In reality, behind the scenes, people like Loki have exposed that they have financial links to the same old usual suspects, you know, the same corporate interests which run the Washington Post or own the Times. You know, I'm talking about Rupert Murdoch here specifically. They also have their hand in the pie behind the likes of Piers, it seems, according to the alleged evidence which Loki put forward. Now, that is problematic, because you and I, who are going to the media and watching people say all sorts of things, and people who are beamed into our living rooms, presented as honest brokers, honest journalists, are essentially being mizzled. We're being led up the garden path, and we're being directed. And there's a strong set of evidences which suggests that actually we're often being engineered and directed in a direction of bias that supports existing agendas. And I'm going to continue with the onslaught on the Israeli fraternity. Again, the way that the whole Aston Villa Maccabi Haifa situation was handled. If you go and look at the videos, again, I have to credit Double Down News on this. They did a very good in-depth report, basically showing just how bad Sky News were in the way that they cancelled the original report, so as to cover up the Maccabi Haifa fans' actions of violence, i.e. instigating the violence in Holland, on the streets of the Netherlands not so long ago. And of course, that being a central issue for the Maccabi Haifa fans who were stopped from coming to Birmingham and to the Aston Villa match, was turned into a huge issue, which, of course, compliantly Keir Starmer and his Labour government tried to intervene on, tried to sort of create suggestions that they would in some way right the wrong done to the Maccabi Haifa fans. And the media, the Western media, went along with it, and you saw that whole kind of apologetics rolled out for Israel yet again. I think the problem with mainstream media and a lot of the corporate-backed, transnational corporate-backed social media, which is emerging now, is that, first of all, they fail to focus on the root causes of most of the problems they try to show us. They never deal with solutions. They don't focus on the solutions so that we get to the real bottom of what should happen. And they don't hold the establishments which are causing those problems and failing to deliver solutions to account nearly enough. So that's my fundamental gripe, is the failure of these media institutions to actually fight for truth. Because the job of a journalist is not to be impartial. That's not the job of a journalist. The job of a journalist is to tell the truth as he sees it and to provide evidence and back it up with real argumentation. That's the job of a real journalist with a moral, ethical backbone. I'm afraid that is far from what Western media journalism, and I could say even Eastern media as well, I don't think it precludes many other agencies as well. This is the reality that we live in. So it means that you have to train yourself to be much more discerning about what is truth and what is illusion. You have to take a lot of what the media says with a pinch of salt, and you've got to do your own homework. Hard, I know. It would mean that literally you'd have to do cross-checks and balances and actually decide to do some real inquiry, ask the right critical questions. Again, a thing which we're not really that good at. We're not even trained to do that in school, to be fair. So you have to understand your vulnerability, that you are essentially vulnerable to media lies, media obfuscations, the tricks and of the trade that are used psychologically to herd you into believing certain things can be seen, for one, on the likes of Tel Aviv Tommy Robinson, on the back of propaganda which has been supported indirectly by mainstream media. You've seen the rise of an entire class of people who think that the immigrants are the main reason for all of Western Europe's woes, when in reality, of course, we know the complications of economics and the policies of government and the misspending of cash, both in forever wars, across COVID reactions, and as well as other subprime and home ownership issues. We know that's where a lot of the money was wasted, which we're all having to pay for. But the media's complicity in not tackling even those issues, going to the root of the problem, in fact, not just not tackling them, but actually those who do try to tackle these issues are now being subjected to censorship. They're subjected to ridicule. They're subjected to threats of arrest as well. Britain is one of the highest rates of arrest for individuals on social media in the world. It has one of the highest rates. This is quite shocking in a democracy, for people to be picked up simply for having views and expressing opposition to some of the standard narratives that pushed out is problematic. As I say, this Trump letter, therefore, becomes quite ridiculous for me, because he threatens to sue the BBC. He's done it before. We know he's done it to CNN and CBS. In fact, CBS, he won a $16 million lawsuit against them. This history, of course, will scare maybe these kinds of big media agencies into backing off. I mean, in this case, they have to back off because they've been biased, as they are biased with so many other things in the BBC. But the fact that this gets such headlines, and the fact that they ignore their crime against the Palestinian people, this is really unacceptable, and it's something that has to be called out. And to my own journalist and media colleagues, I would say, if you're in jobs with those people who have a natural inclination towards Israel, for instance, which Rupert Murdoch certainly has, and the Barclay brothers, I think there's only one of them left, they certainly have. The Daily Telegraph and others display it. I could allegedly point my finger at all of these agencies as being openly biased against the reality of the genocide in Gaza. In fact, they don't even let us call it genocide. We're actually punished for saying genocide. So I'd contend that this is just the tip of the iceberg of exposing how the media is not impartial and how changes has to happen. Accountability, certainly with state media like the BBC, should be far more stringent. The public, if they don't get what they want, should stop paying the license fee. Simply withdraw your consent.